Hi everyone, my name's Holly Booth and I'm a PhD researcher at Balliol College at the University of Oxford. Welcome to my class on saving sharks. So today, first of all, I'm going to give you a very quick introduction to me and my career, and then we're going to talk about why sharks matter, why they're threatened, and how we can save them. So within this class, our main objectives are to learn some weird and wonderful facts about the biology and ecology of sharks, to learn about the threats facing sharks and their risk of extinction, and to think about some specific actions that you can take to play a role in protecting sharks and the marine environment in general. So let's get started. Just a quick introduction to me. I'm originally from Birmingham. I started life in Birmingham. And I've been working in conservation for about the last 10 years now. Not always in sharks and marine conservation, but I've been working on sharks and rays for about the last 5 years and mainly living in Indonesia. And I originally started working in Indonesia when I did my master's research project, which was on illegal manta ray trade. And then I started working full-time for a conservation NGO called the Wildlife Conservation Society. And then in 2019, I started my PhD at Oxford on shark conservation. So I'm now in the final year of my PhD. And so hopefully I have lots of shark knowledge to share with you guys. In terms of what I actually do on a day-to-day basis, when I tell people that I work on shark conservation, they often think that I spend all my life sort of swimming around in the ocean with sharks. But actually, in reality, my research is more focused on, sadly, looking at dead sharks in fish markets. So understanding which species fishers catch and interviewing fishermen. So my research has quite a large socioeconomic component because I'm basically trying to understand the reasons that fishers catch sharks and rays and their economic dependence on certain endangered species. So that's a little bit about me. And now we're going to get into the class. So in terms of just a broad overview, the key points that we're going to cover is what is a shark anyway? Should we be scared of sharks? Why should we care about sharks? Should we be worried about sharks going extinct? Why are sharks going extinct? What can we do to save them? And then at the end, we're gonna make a pledge. I'm gonna talk through the different kind of questions here, and in each section, there's going to be a moment where I ask you guys to pause, and you can pause the video, and there'll be a little exercise for you guys to do, or some sort of self-directed learning for you guys to do. So you can sort of watch out for those as the video proceeds. So, what is a shark? This might seem like a slightly strange question, but I think it's important to get our definitions right before we begin the class. So this is where we pause for your first task. And I want you guys, without looking on the internet or looking anything up, just write down 3 words to describe a shark. Like, what do you think the defining feature of a shark is? Write down a sentence about what you think makes a shark, and maybe think about how many different kinds of shark are there. So that's your task for now, just to spend a couple of minutes doing that. Now for the answers. What is a shark? Well, sharks are actually defined by their cartilaginous skeleton. So sharks don't have bones. Their entire skeleton is made out of cartilage, which is kind of what we have in our nose and in our ears. So our whole skeleton is made of cartilage. When I use the word shark, what I actually mean is a family called the chondrichthyans, which means all cartilaginous fish. And so interestingly, this includes not only typical sharks, but it also includes rays and skates, which are very similar to rays, and another family called chimera, which are these sort of weird cartilaginous deep sea sharks. And there's actually over 1,000 described species of cartilaginous fish. And as I said, these include sharks, rays, skates, and chimera. So they're a huge and very diverse species. To give you a couple of examples of the sort of diversity of sharks, on this slide here, sharks include whale sharks, which is the world's biggest fish, and they can grow up to 12 meters in length. And then they go all the way down to this tiny dwarf lantern shark, which is in the bottom left-hand corner there, which is only a few centimeters long. And these guys are actually bioluminescent. They can glow in the dark. They also include the frilled shark. So the frilled shark is the one that's in the top center, the kind of grey one. And this species has the longest gestation period. That's the longest pregnancy of any known vertebrate species. So the frilled shark is pregnant for 42 months, which is longer than the African elephant. So that is a long time to be pregnant. The one below the frilled shark, that is the manta ray. And they can grow to be up to sort of 5 meters wide in wingspan. And they're thought to be highly intelligent. So they're one of very few marine species to have passed something called the mirror test, which is a kind of classic animal intelligence test where you put a mirror in front of them and you paint a blob of paint on their face. And if they kind of go and inspect the blob of paint on their face in the mirror, then it suggests that they have sort of self-awareness. So it seems that manta rays are self-aware. Underneath the manta rays, we have a little cute, friendly black-tip reef shark. These are kind of, if you ever go scuba diving or snorkeling and are lucky enough to see sharks, these are the main kind of sharks you're likely to see, and they're very small and very cute and very friendly. In the top right-hand corner, we have thresher sharks, and they have this huge whippy tail, which is really beautiful, and they use their whippy tail to stun their prey. Below the thresher shark, we have the cookie cutter shark. The reason it's called a cookie cutter shark is because it has this circular mouth parts. They're quite small. They have these circular mouth parts, and they feed by attaching themselves onto bigger animals and taking a sort of circular cookie slice out of their skin to feed. And then finally, below the cookie cutter shark, we have sawfish, which are unfortunately one of the world's most endangered species. They're critically endangered. And they have this really cool sort of like saw-like appendage. It's called a rostrum. And they use that rostrum to stun their prey as well. So those are just a few examples of different types of weird and wonderful shark species. So the next question, should we be scared of sharks? I want you to just pause for a second. I want you to visit Google and search for things more likely to kill you than sharks and list 5 to 10 of them down. And then just think about the results. Are these results what you expected? So please pause the video and go and do that task. So, answers. Should we be scared of sharks? I suspect, based on the results you found, that you discover that there are many, many animals which are way more likely to kill you than sharks. So these include things like mosquitoes, dogs, hippos, and in fact, you're actually way more likely to be killed by being trampled by cows. So we should fear the real killer here. So the next question, why should we care about sharks? This is another chance for you guys to just pause for a moment and do a little task. So sharks actually provide benefits to humans in several ways. And I just want you guys to pause the video for a minute and spend 5 minutes to think about what these benefits might be. Why should we care about sharks? Well, sharks actually provide a huge range of benefits to people. In some cases, they're beneficial. In some cases, they're beneficial in fisheries and can provide sort of millions of dollars in fishery and export value. In some cases, they're really important for food. So in Indonesia, where I work, shark meat is a kind of cheap and readily available source of animal protein. And in some places, shark curry has also cultural significance. But it's not just Indonesia or places in the tropics where shark meat is eaten. So places like Australia, they have flake, and that's from shark meat. And in some cases in the UK, we have things like rock salmon, which you can sometimes get in a fish and chip shop, and that is also from shark as well. Shark tourism is also really valuable to humans. So people pay lots of money to go on shark and ray diving holidays, and can pay thousands of dollars to go on these luxury liveaboards where they get to go and scuba dive and snorkel with sharks and manta rays. Sharks can also be really important for culture. So this picture here is of some shark callers in a place called Kontu in Papua New Guinea. Um, and they have this traditional practice where they go out to the ocean and they sort of rattle these like dried coconut shells into the ocean to attract sharks. And then they actually capture the sharks with their bare hands and kill them with their bare hands, and then eat them. Which is obviously a bit traumatic for the shark, but the whole ceremony has real cultural significance, and it's kind of a cultural connection to the ocean and to sharks. So if you have a minute, you can either pause the video now or you can do it afterwards. I recommend Googling shark callers of Kontu, and you can watch a video of this happening. And then finally, sharks play a hugely important role in maintaining healthy oceans. The sharks and rays are often apex or mesopredators, and they play important roles in maintaining functional and productive ocean ecosystems, ensuring that we have healthy fish populations. The ocean in general also plays a huge role in climate change mitigation. So they have all these other sort of ecosystem services benefits that are sometimes difficult for us to quantify, but are super important for us having a safe and healthy planet to live on. So those are just a few reasons why we should care about sharks. Maybe you thought of some others that aren't on this list, some extra ones as well. There are many others, it's just a few examples. So, should we be worried about sharks going extinct? This is now time for another little task for you guys. Visit the IUCN Red List website, and that's www.iucnredlist.org, and search for a shark species of your choice. You can search for anything, whichever you like. And then I want you to note down some facts. So, the IUCN Red List provides this huge database of information on lots of different species, not just sharks and rays. And I want you to note down where are they found, how deep can they swim, how big can they grow, how many pups do they have. So shark babies are actually called pups. They give birth, not all species, but many species give birth to live young called pups. And then I want you to know, is the species endangered? Does the IUCN Red List classify the species as threatened or endangered? So just pause the video again. You can go and do that little task, go and do a bit of research on the Red List website, and then we'll come back to the video again. So answer time. Should we be worried about sharks going extinct? The answer is yes. So sharks and their cartilaginous relatives are one of the world's most threatened species groups. There was an assessment done a few years ago which estimated that about 1 in 4 of sharks and their relatives are threatened with extinction. That was in about 2014. Since then, there's actually been an update. There's been more assessments conducted, and I now think it might be as many as 1/3 of sharks and rays are threatened with extinction. So that's quite sad. It's quite worrying. So why are sharks going extinct? There's actually a couple of reasons, and these reasons sort of combine with each other. So reason number one is that they have vulnerable ecology. So sharks are generally large, slow-growing, late to mature, and produce a few offspring. And then a second reason why sharks are going extinct is because they're threatened by overfishing. So overfishing is the biggest threat to shark and ray populations, and this is also exacerbated by the impacts of climate change and destruction and degradation of marine habitat. So it's estimated that at least 100 million sharks are killed per year in fisheries. And this graph that you can see here shows trends in annual capture production of sharks and rays. And you can see that it's been steadily increasing since the 1950s, going up and up and up and up, till around the 2000s when we started seeing these big declines. And that's despite increases in fishing effort. So there's more boats on the water and more fishing happening, but we're seeing fewer sharks caught. And this is a sign that their populations are sadly declining due to overfishing. So why is this fishing happening? Well, it's sometimes targeted. So there are some fisheries that specifically go out to catch sharks, in a large part because of their high value fins. So the fins of some species are particularly valuable in international trade. And there are some fisheries that specifically go out in order to target sharks so they can sell these fins. But actually, it's thought that most shark mortality, most of the sharks that are killed, is due to bycatch in non-target fisheries. So if you have fishing nets or fishing lines in the water going to catch fish species that most of us like to eat, such as tuna, unfortunately, sharks also like to hang out where the tuna hang out. And so if you have these big nets and hooks and lines in the water, if you're trying to scoop up or catch tuna, then you're also very likely to scoop up and catch sharks as well. So we have this term bycatch, which is where sharks are accidentally caught along with other fish species. And this is thought to be the greatest source of shark mortality in the world. And all of these types of mortality, whether it's targeted or bycatch, have different sort of human drivers. So in some cases, it's for profit for the wildlife trade. So people go and target sharks for their fins. In some cases, it's for food security and nutrition. So people catch sharks to eat the meat. In some cases, it's for livelihoods because people have limited other options and they're basically selling sharks because it's sort of one of the only options they have available. In some cases, it's because of social norms and culture. So that example from the shark callers in Papua New Guinea that I mentioned earlier, they're catching sharks, sort of, they eat them, but it's also for cultural reasons as well. And this picture here is of a man leaping from a boat in a place in eastern Indonesia to catch a manta ray. And so there was this fishery where people would target manta rays with spears. And people who were the top manta ray hunters were sort of rock stars in their village, and it had important cultural significance. And then we have this sort of accidental catch where there's not really any kind of underlying socioeconomic drivers other than the desire to catch the target species, such as tuna, as I mentioned earlier, and then the sharks get tangled in those nets. So those are just a few of the sort of underlying reasons why sharks are caught. So what can we do to save them? Well, it's quite complicated. And as I said, there are lots of different species and they're found all over the world, lots of different fisheries. And so you need sort of specific approaches for different places and different species. But broadly speaking, there are kind of three broad types of things you can do. One is regulation. So you can put rules in place to regulate international trade in certain species. So CITES is the Convention on the International Trade of Endangered Species. And it's a big international agreement where countries agree to regulate trade in certain species. And there are several shark species on this list. And for some species, they're not allowed to be traded internationally at all because they're too endangered. Or for some species, countries are allowed to trade them internationally, but they have to show that trade in those species is sustainable. So that's an example of some types of regulations. You can also use technology, and especially developing new technology to reduce bycatch of sharks and rays in fishing gear. So as I mentioned earlier, bycatch is this huge threat to sharks, and there are different ways that you can sort of modify fishing gears so that sharks and rays get caught less. So for example, for devil rays and manta rays, you can use electrosensory deterrents, so you can put certain lights outside nets, and it makes it easy for the rays to see that the net is there, and they're more likely to swim around it and avoid it. And then there's also the sort of socioeconomic side, and this can be things like providing incentives and alternatives for coastal communities who depend on marine resources. So you put a rule in place that says people can't catch sharks. might be really difficult for them to follow this rule if they don't have any other options. So sometimes we need to provide these incentives and alternatives for coastal communities, especially in places like Indonesia. However, it's not just these kind of high-level concepts. Actually, everyone can play a role in marine conservation. So I want you just to pause for another task for a second and just spend 5 minutes thinking about something that you could potentially do to help to reduce threats to sharks based on what you've learned so far today. So just have a little think and write down 2 or 3 of your favourite ideas. So one thing you can do is avoid or reduce your consumption of meat and seafood. So as I mentioned, bycatch is a major threat to sharks, and this is driven by the broader seafood industry. So if you reduce your seafood consumption, that would potentially help to reduce bycatch to sharks as well. And the reason I also put meat in here is because in many cases in fisheries, some fish are used as a way of providing feed for cattle, for example. And so not all fish is necessarily used for human consumption. Sometimes it's used as feed in animal agriculture as well. So if everybody sort of reduces their consumption of meat, then we have more sustainable food systems overall and potentially less pressure on fisheries. Another thing you can do is only eat responsibly sourced seafood. So there are certain brands with certification schemes, which essentially companies have to show that they have they're mitigating bycatch as much as possible, or they have sustainable fishing practices. So you can look out for things like the Marine Stewardship Council logo on seafood that you eat. You can become an ambassador for the ocean. So you can encourage your government to protect sharks and other marine species by signing petitions and only voting for green, environmentally friendly politicians. Or you can study marine biology and become a marine biologist like me. And finally, you can also volunteer or donate to conservation organisations that are doing work on the ground to protect some of these species. So those are a few top tips about what we can do. And just quickly to sort of summarise what we've talked about today. Sharks are one of the most ancient and diverse groups of species on the planet, and they play important roles in marine ecosystems and in human well-being. Sharks are sadly also one of the world's most threatened species groups due to their vulnerable ecology and overfishing. However, there are many things we can do to prevent sharks from going extinct, and everyone can play a role in contributing to marine conservation, including you guys. You don't have to be a marine biologist or a professional conservationist to participate in sustainability. So what next? There's a couple of things that you guys can do after this. Your final mission, should you choose to accept it, is to think about anything that you can do personally to pledge to help to protect sharks and the ocean. If you want to commit to at least one action, you can visit www.pledgeforOurfuture.earth to register your pledge along with other conservationists around the world who are pledging to make a change for nature. And you can share it with your friends and family and encourage them to take actions too. So your final mission is to make a personal pledge. If you want more resources and more information on sharks or on conservation in general, you can look up the IUCN Red List, which we looked at earlier, which has huge amounts of information on all different kinds of species. You can also look at the Conservation Optimism website, which has lots of resources on how you can get involved in conservation. You can also find out more about sustainable seafood choices at www.mcsuk.org/goodfishguide/search. And that can help to tell you about different sustainable seafood sources that have lower impact on the environment and bycatch. And if you want to make a pledge to take action, either on helping to save sharks or on any conservation issue, you can visit www.pledgeforOurfuture.earth. Okay, and that's all from me. And if you want to find out more information about my research or follow my research journey, you can find me on Twitter @hollyboothie or on Instagram @the_hollytype. And my research profile is also available on this website, www.iccs.org.uk/person/Holly-Booth.